You'd be amazed at some of the things that we as humans have discovered to taste good. One of the most popular tacos in Mexico is tacos de lengua, or cow tongue tacos. I don't think it's as popular in the States as stuff like al pastor, but I think it should be. The tongue is full of that beef flavor that we love, and the texture is just a little bit different. It's a hard to explain mix between tenderness and chewiness that you just have to experience. Like if I told you this was cooked tongue meat, would you believe me? If you're teetering on the edge of pickiness and don't know if you'd want to try something like this, I promise it's not as bad as it sounds. Let me show you how you can make this at home. It's incredibly easy. So of course I'm starting with one of these cow tongues, which I find at Sam's. They also probably sell these at Hispanic markets and other international markets.
Licky boy.
They usually weigh between like 3 to 5 pounds. I'm not going to do anything to prep this except for cut it into semi-sections. That is, cutting to the bottom of it but not all the way through, just so I can bend it and fit it into my pot better. The added surface area is also going to help cook it faster. I'm also going to prep a few aromatics to help flavor this as it cooks. I'm just going to chop a medium-sized onion in half and then a whole head of garlic in half as well. Then just chopping 1 carrot into rough chunks. That all gets tossed into a large sauce pot along with a handful of cilantro leaves and about 3 bay leaves. Also adding a handful of black peppercorns and about 5 cloves just for extra flavor. Then I'll just try to nestle the tongue in there, and you can rearrange stuff just so it's sitting more flatly. And then just fill this with water until it's just covered. You could use chicken stock instead, but what I'm going to do is grab some of this better than bouillon paste and mix that in. It'll have a pretty similar effect. I'm going to get that over high heat so I can bring it to a boil. I'm also adding a few pinches of salt because the tongue is not getting really seasoned otherwise. And once it's boiling, I'm going to bring that down to a simmer and let it cook until the meat is tender. I'd say this could take anywhere from like 3 to 5 hours. It's pretty forgiving on both ends, but you just don't want to overdo it too much because it'll become dry. I pulled mine out just shy of 4 hours and I was satisfied with that. You can check tenderness with a fork just like you do with any other braised meat. But yeah, I'm going to pull mine out of the cooking liquid, which you can strain out and reserve that as stock for later use. And at this point, you're going to want to take off that rough skin on the outside of the tongue. It does not break down and it's very leathery, so you don't want to eat it. There might be a better way to take this off, but I'm just kind of ripping it and peeling it off. Then I'm going to fully separate the sections that we made earlier, and with each chunk I'm going to try to trim off every side of it just to get rid of any nasty stuff on the outside. Towards the base of the tongue there's some really rough and fatty parts that I don't want to eat, so I'm just cutting those off completely. But once you're down to the edible meat part, I'm just going to cut that into pretty thin planes, and then each of those planes into kind of thin strips. You want to make small sections out of this because it's going to be a little different than something like shredded beef. It's going to be a little rubbery but still very tender, just not like the shredded meats that you might have braised before. So I'm giving it a few run-throughs with the knife just to make sure everything is nice and small. A vital step I think you need to take with this meat is to add some Maillard reaction to it. We didn't sear it or anything before we cooked it, so I think this is necessary. The fastest way I've found to do this is to get my wok out and put it over my gas grates. I've done this same thing with carne asada and al pastor tacos before. It just gets a nice char all around all the meat, and it has a high volume so you can fit a lot in at one time. So to boost the beef flavor, I'm going to add some beef tallow that I have in my fridge, but you could also use neutral oil if that's all you have. And once that's melted, I'm going to dump all my meat in and get that moving. Just keep tossing and stirring so everything gets browned evenly. It should only take a few minutes. It's also a good idea to hit this with a few pinches of salt because remember it lacks seasoning. And you can just take it out whenever you see enough browning to your liking. You're just looking for these charred bits on the outside. That, ladies and gentlemen, is flavor. And I don't really like to have sides with my tacos because that means I get to eat less tacos and I want to eat more. But I do like to add some things to the taco, and while my meat was cooking, I made some of this salsa verde. It's a nice tangy spicy punch that doesn't get in the way of the beef flavor, but it adds brightness to it and complements it. So for this, I'm going to grab about 10 tomatillos, or 1 to 2 pounds, about a half of a white onion, 2 cloves of garlic still left in their peel, and 2 chile serranos, but you could also use jalapeños. These are just a little spicier. And I also have some lime for juicing and cilantro. So I'm just going to peel all the tomatillos and cut those in half just so I can expose the middle of it. Also cutting the onion into a couple pieces as well as the serrano in half. You can choose to take the ribs and seeds out if you don't want it super spicy, but I think that's a nice touch. Just remember the rest of the taco is going to mute some of the spice. I'm laying everything except for the lime and cilantro on a baking sheet. I'm coating this in a little bit of olive oil. Speaking of Maillard reaction, we're going to broil these under the flame to get some browning on them, which is flavor. So that tray goes right under the flame and I move that around a bit just so everything gets even amount of it. Keep an eye on it so nothing burns too much, but be patient as this can take about 10 minutes. You're just looking for the skins of the aromatics to be nice and blackened. It's a super common thing to do when making salsa because it imparts a ton of remarkable flavor. So I peel the garlic and add everything into a blender along with the juice of half of a lime to start, also those cilantro leaves. A preliminary pinch of salt and then whiz that up on medium speed just to get everything incorporated. I try to leave it slightly chunky, but it's not the end of the world if you fully puree it. At this point we can taste for seasoning and acidity. I needed a good bit more salt and I decided to use the juice from the other half of the lime because I wanted more acidity. My advice is to make this a little saltier and a little more limey than you'd want, because again, this is going to flavor the entire taco, so you want it to account for the other things that aren't seasoned the same way. But once it's seasoned to your liking, you have a beautiful salsa verde that can be used on these tacos and with anything else. It's best to make this in advance, but at least do this while you're cooking the beef so you can stick it in the fridge and let it cool down. But back to our beef being done, it's time to assemble our tacos, and I will always use corn tortillas for this because they are way superior and always better than flour. But just to make them more pliable and get them a little crispy, I'm going to put them directly over the gas flame of my stove. I just flip that after about 30 seconds and then repeat on the other side. Not looking to totally crisp these up, but it'll help to make them more pliable and hold the meat better. I'm arranging these next to each other on my cutting board just for presentation, and then dumping in a generous handful of the lengua in each taco, followed by a healthy spoonful of the salsa verde, and then no traditional taco is complete without the handful of diced onion and chopped cilantro. And just for the thumbnail, I'm adding a few thinly sliced radishes. Like I said, no sides for me because I want to eat more tacos, but if you want to make something to serve on the side, be my guest. But these are beautiful, just like something you get from a street vendor in Mexico. Seriously, do not knock this until you try it. Let's get to the taste test. Oh boy, this one's a treat. You won't find something like this at a local Tex-Mex restaurant. You might, but it's not as common. But if you can find a decently authentic taqueria, you'll definitely find tacos like this. And if you've never done yourself the favor of trying these, then please do. And if you can't find them anywhere, then this video is showing you that you can do it yourself. But let's get in and enjoy one of these bad boys. Provecho. Yep. The taco is truly amazing and a work of art, and we should all be grateful for them. But specifically, lengua is such a unique meat to have inside of this. It tastes like beef, but it doesn't taste like steak or ground beef that you would put in here. And it's got a weird sort of rubbery texture, but it's also so tender at the same time if you cook it long enough. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but a lot of people love this for good reason. And keeping the flavor simple so the meat can shine is important, but of course having a salsa roja or verde in this case really helps bring out the flavor in the right way. Truly epic. I gotta do this more often. If you would have asked me 10 years ago to try cow tongue, I would have told you straight up no, never. But I'm glad I've started to branch out into different foods, and I'm really willing to try anything at least once. If you're trying to expand your horizons, this is a great way to do it, and I think you'd like it if you gave it a shot. Really super simple to do. You just throw everything into a pot and simmer it for a few hours and then crisp up the meat and you're done. It's a great way to prep for the week. You have a lot of meat and it keeps really well as well. But yeah, Mexico is on top of the food world for a really good reason. This is one of the best things that they have to offer. Please don't skip that step of browning the meat because that Maillard reaction is really necessary in my opinion. And that acidic kick of this salsa just hits right. And I recommend oversalting it and overliming it just a bit so that it compensates for the lack of flavor in this meat. But that's gonna do it for me today. Thank you all for watching, be blessed, and I'll see you next time. Corn over flour 8 days of the week, fight me on it.